Mute. Right. Well, hello. Achtung, as we say in We Have Wasteland. But first things first. James Holland, congratulations. Publication day.
Cheers.
September the 3rd. What better day?
Yeah.
To celebrate a book about the Second World War than the day it started.
81 years ago for us here in Britain.
For us here in Britain. A couple of days earlier for people in Poland, of course.
Yeah.
Or in China, different. It doesn't matter.
Okay. But it's an anniversary. That's
but it's an anniversary. But,
it's a big day.
But congratulations. I can say this as someone who has read this book. Right?
You sat through the whole thing.
Because I have read this book. It's a terrific tome. I only found we had to call you about it. One small error. I had to check whether you really meant what you'd written. And it's a mistake anyone can make. But it's a fantastic read, and I know people who know the stuff you do will it'll be right up their alley. But look, you're in your second volume of War in the West.
Yes.
You've done Malta, Battle of Britain. You've gone into smaller things like Malta, larger sort of headline things like the Battle of Britain. Sicily 43.
Yeah.
Why write about Sicily when you've done D-Day, you've done the Normandy battle? What's that for?
Well, I've got to say that I didn't really know much about Sicily, apart from the kind of sort of the bare bones about it. But then I went on a battlefield tour with the army.
Yeah.
And it is just literally the best place to do a battlefield tour. Because you've got this, you suddenly realise you've got a very contained story. It's an island, so it's got very obvious start, middle and end.
Yeah.
And suddenly you're starting to sort of think about it and you think, okay, it's got special forces, tick. It's got Paddy Mayne, bigger tick.
Yeah.
You know, it's got paratroopers. It's got mad Germans. It's got Valentin Huber, who's one of the most interesting generals, known as Der Man.
Yeah.
He's got one arm.
Yeah.
From his wound from an amputation in the First World War.
Yes.
So hold on, he must be pretty special because that means that he's still in the army in the 1920s when almost no one else is.
So he's an old school German military badass.
Yeah, but to stay in the army in the 1920s when it's quite a big thing anyway. But to stay in the army when you've only got one arm is an even bigger thing. So he's pretty impressive.
Pistols mainly, I expect. Pistols
maybe. But it's also it's got Tiger tanks. It's got Italians. It has got the mafia that they are involved.
Yeah.
It's got all sorts of things in it. It's got the heat. It's got the Mediterranean. It's got Spitfires. It's got bombers. It's got Messerschmitts. It's literally got everything you could possibly want from a World War II story. And it's a brilliant place to walk the ground. It really is. There's lots of remnants of the battle still there. You can still see it and everything. There's bunkers, there's bullet holes. Lots of the landscape is completely unchanged. And it's a really fantastic story. And of course, it's where the Allies as a coalition, because the Allies are not allies, they're actually just a coalition, is where they really start to sort of get themselves together. It's really where they start to sort things out. Because although Americans and British have been fighting side by side in Tunisia, it's only one corps of Americans as part of British First Army.
Yeah.
Whereas it's two armies. It's
an army level. So
it's army level.
It's gone up again.
It's gone up a massive gear, and that's really interesting. Okay. And it's air, land, and sea. And I think
so this leads me to the next question, right? Because that, as a pitch for like a Second World War battle that we really ought to know the story of, and we really ought to be interested in, especially given what happens in the next 2 years,
right?
Which is, only within the year they do a colossal, the
11 months later.
11 months later, the biggest. I mean, things of the Second World War in the second half tend to happen in 11 months phases, don't they? Why is it a thing that's in abeyance? Why is this not a thing that people are attracted to? And so what's the problem with Sicily in that respect? Why have you had to write a book about it? Why isn't it on a shelf? Why is there not a shelf groaning of Sicily?
Well, I think it's because of what followed. I think Monte Cassino is more famous or infamous, depending on which way you look at it, and Anzio in terms of the Italian campaign.
Yeah,
and then you've got D-Day, of course, which is kind of the daddy, really, of kind of Second World War subjects for kind of we Westerners.
Yeah.
And I think it just gets forgotten. I mean, at the time, back in 1943, this was absolutely front page news all around the world. And I'm talking about all around the world. I mean, don't forget this.
Well, especially in the Eagles the Wolf's Lair, rather.
Yeah,
they're all
absolutely.
going, oh crap.
Yeah. And Operation Citadel, which is Kursk, which is a kind of the last time the Germans go forward on the Eastern Front, is cancelled.
Over which much more ink has been spilt in Sicily.
Yes, and that is called off by Hitler personally because of the Allied invasion in Sicily. And there is this kind of sort of persistent myth that somehow the Mediterranean theatre is small beer compared to kind of what's going on the Eastern Front. And it is true, it is compared to boots on the ground. But one has to be very careful about seeing boots on the ground as equating to strategic importance.
Yeah.
You know, what is also happens at the same time is something like, I think it's 3,504 aircraft in the Luftwaffe are destroyed over that summer in 1943 in the Mediterranean.
Yeah.
But 702 are lost on the Eastern Front.
Yeah.
So it depends on which way you look at it. If you're looking at it purely in terms of kind of boots on the ground, then, you know, obviously lots more people are killed on the Eastern Front. But you also have to remember that boots on the ground is also dictated by space.
Yeah.
So, you know, if you think about Guadalcanal in the Pacific, for example, that is a pretty small island in the far off Pacific.
Yeah.
There's a limit to how many men you can can function there. But also, no one would deny that is of enormous strategic importance.
But also, if you're considering it in terms of the Second World War being an industrial conflict, and no one would deny that.
Yeah.
Whose factories are winning and where?
Yeah.
And if you're shooting down lots of aeroplanes, then your factories are defeating their factories. And,
yes.
You know, because after all, for instance, the Bomber Command campaign is basically using your factories to destroy their factories.
Yes.
And the planes are the thing at the sharp end of that. But it's about a much bigger picture than simply the point of combat and the point of where the kinetic moment occurs. Yeah.
Yeah, that is absolutely right. And I think one of the other things there's two things here. First of all, is that the Sicily invasion that sees the end of Italy as an ally. Really, it's the overthrow of Mussolini on the 25th of July. That brings the Badoglio government. Right from the word go, it's absolutely clear that they're off ski.
Yeah,
I mean, you know, it's all over. It's only a matter of time. The Germans know it. The Italians know it. And what the Italians are doing is they're desperately trying to organise a means of getting out of the war with the least amount of pain for Italy. Yeah. And obviously,
although they know
that goes badly,
and they know perfectly well how much pain is on offer.
Yes.
So I mean, because
but that also means in turn that the Germans have then got to not only occupy Italy, they've also got to occupy the whole of the Aegean.
Yeah.
Because it's really interesting how sort of the narrative of the Second World War suggested it's the British who are obsessed with the southern flank and obsessed with the Mediterranean. The person who is the single one person who is more obsessed with the Mediterranean than anyone else in the entire Second World War is Hitler.
Yeah.
And that's because he fears that it's the soft underbelly. He literally is. And it's really interesting when you look at the reports of meetings, and there's lots of verbatim transcripts of these conversations that Hitler has. It comes up time and time again. And when you look at the appreciations of the OKW, and the OKW is the Oberkommando to Wehrmacht, which is a German combined services general staff.
Yeah.
Over and over and over again, they're going on and on and on about the Mediterranean. Well, it really is very, very important. And the main reason for that, in turn, is not only because, you know, they're vulnerable from the south, but it's also because in Romania is the Presti oil fields. That is the only oil, real oil, that they can get their hands on. And if that's threatened, if that is destroyed or overrun, then they are completely stuck because oil, of course, is one of the absolute key ingredients of any warfare.
Now, one of the things I was most struck by, and to be honest, in reading the audiobook, and I did it in this very chamber, ladies and gentlemen, the Modern Star via producer on the Zoom going, no, you've pronounced that wrong every 5 minutes. The German names, but finally it's the Italian names, which have got hidden soft consonants.
Yes.
I was fascinated and entertained by some of those conversations, the OKW conversations, where they descend into well, anyway, the thing about the Italians, and it turns into barroom bigot.
I always knew he was a rat.
It's amazing.
It's amazing,
and that they're wasting their time, their breath, their mental energy, their strategic thought getting tangled up in this.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, that guy's no good because most of the officers in his staff are married to English women, and they
literally believe this,
and they're making it up,
nonsense.
and they believe it, and it's just brilliant, and it's like, yeah, I heard that too, and to read that, and
they're always complaining, they're always saying that they haven't got anything, but you know, I was in Rome, and these playboys, you know, still out on the lash.
But I mean,
it's absolutely amazing.
And we have talked about this a lot on the podcast and in the live cast with our sweet patrons who we love dearly. Is that one of the things that's really striking, and again this comes up in the book, is there are all these British intelligence efforts to stymie the Germans' reading of Allied intentions and American intelligence efforts.
Yes.
But really, there's kind of no need for it, because Hitler's convinced it's going to be Greece, even though he has not for one moment considered fighter cover as the absolute...
and that is absolutely incredible. I mean, Hitler has this amazing ability to view his enemy's thoughts as a kind of mirage of his own.
Yeah.
So Hitler's sitting there in the war zone. He's thinking, the place that I'm most worried about is Romania. So that is where the Allies are going to go for.
Yeah.
Which means they're going to land in Greece or the Balkans or something. And everyone goes, well, yeah, but there is this big issue. If you remember, when we were planning Operation Sea Lion, we had to go across the kind of sort of southeast England because that's the only place where we had fighter cover.
Yeah.
And if you remember, my Führer, you said that absolutely a prerequisite of any invasion was that we had control of airspace. All that is just completely gone out the window. He's completely forgotten that. And of course, that is exactly what is dictating where the Allies land, which means...
Well, so it's Sardinia or Sicily.
Sardinia...
Well, no. So the options are Sardinia or Sicily. There's no point invading Sardinia.
There's no point invading Sardinia at all. I mean, well, I suppose there's a point because then it's further up the leg of Italy and you could outflank the whole of southern Italy and all the rest of it. But it's only just within the limits of fighter cover. And the question is, okay, so why do they need fighter cover? Well, the point is because when you're landing, you are incredibly vulnerable.
Yeah.
You're in slow landing craft. You're coming onto vehicles. There's a mass of shipping out there, and yes, they've all got anti-aircraft guns and pom-poms and all the rest of it. But that makes you incredibly vulnerable.
Yeah.
To avoid being shot at by bombers from the air when you're out at sea, you need to be moving around all over the place. But by the very nature of an invasion, you can't do that because it's all suddenly everything slows down because you're nearing the coast, or you've got to actually stand still. So you're incredibly vulnerable. So you absolutely have to have control of the skies over that invasion front. That is totally non-negotiable.
Yeah.
And this goes back to the whole planning of Sicily in the first place, that when you're doing these amphibious operations, whatever it may be, whether it's Normandy, whether it's Operation Husky, the one thing that absolutely trumps absolutely everything is that it doesn't fail.
Yeah.
The moment you've got a foothold on Sicily, on Normandy, wherever it is, you're going to win because you're the Allies and your material advantage is so great that you can't lose.
Yeah.
The crux moment is in those early stages when you haven't got overwhelming strength because you've only just arrived.
Yeah.
And you're limited by landing craft, by shipping, by all sorts of things on how many men and how much ammunition and rations and all the rest of it and water you can deliver on D-Day and D+1 and D+2 and D+3. So that is the absolute nub of any invasion like that. And you have to remember with Husky, no one's ever done anything on this scale ever before.
But it's the sort of ultimate lesson of the Second World War, isn't it? If the enemy's air capability can't interfere with what you're trying to achieve, it'll work. So American factories are unmolested by air attack. Right. Russian factories are unmolested by air attack. By 1943,
so
British ones are really. So it's all about if you can ensure that the enemy can't bring his air component to bear, you will control that space, and that's what it's all about.
Yeah.
Right. So, okay. So I mean, what we've done a bit. We haven't been entirely tangential. We're still talking about Sicily. We've actually managed to stay. For now, I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll toss in a question, and then we'll come back to the fuller story, because after all, what you have here is a thing being planned while the Allies are still finishing up in North Africa.
Yes.
8th Army have arrived on the scene in
Yeah.
Tunisia, having chased Rommel across North Africa.
Yeah.
First Army have landed, and everyone's meeting in the middle.
Yep.
Eighth Army are kind of
Coming from the east.
First Army from the west. Germans are the meat and the sandwich.
Yep.
In the end,
Constantly reinforced by Hitler.
well, yes, and constantly reinforcing. He's reinforcing failure, like kind of reliably.
Yeah, but it's not just that. It's also the vast amount of Luftwaffe. I mean, something like, I think it's like 2,400 Luftwaffe planes are shot down in Tunisia. That's quite separate to the 3,504 I mentioned earlier on.
Yeah.
So that's 6,000, isn't it?
Yeah.
6,000 in total.
Yeah.
Lost in 1943 in the Mediterranean.
Yeah.
6,000 aircraft.
Yeah. And that, if that's...
How many shot down the Battle of Britain? I mean...
Well, yeah, what is it? Well, you should know. You wrote a book about it.
Yeah, well, I can't remember that. But you know, it's not that many.
So what's striking about this, say, compared to D-Day, is what we all know about D-Day is a staff that isn't currently tangled up in what's going on. From where you're going to launch the invasion, is sat figuring it out. Freddie Morgan sat there figuring out what on earth an overlord might be like. What Sledgehammer or Roundup or whatever what they've been working their way through this. Whereas this is done essentially on the hoof by Eighth Army's staff and the American staff, who come together and stick this thing together with Mary Cunningham, with the Middle East, with the North African Tactical Air Force, and you're having
spots.
Well, exactly. And so you're having to meld American and British air power. And American air power at this point turns up, and there's so many of them, it's absurd.
Yeah, that's one of the things that's really, really interesting. And again, there is this constant focus on land warfare. I think at the expense of naval warfare and the air component. And what's really interesting about Tunisia, which ends with the Axis surrender on the 13th of May 1943, is that there's just one corps, American corps, within First Army.
Yeah.
So there's, they represent maybe, 1/6 of the manpower or something. The other 5/6 are British.
Yeah.
An Indian. And but in terms of numbers of aircraft, by middle of May 1943, actually the Americans outnumber the RAF.
Massive.
And so it's on that front, they're kind of in the driving seat, and that again underlines just how important Americans and indeed the British place air power.
And so what you get, and I thought it was really interesting because after all, echoes of D-Day and all of this. Is you get a rehearsal for the idea of using air power to simply win a battle. It's Lampedusa, isn't it?
No, it's Pantelleria.
Sorry, it's Pantelleria. My mistake. It's Pantelleria.
Which is just off the Tunisian coast, which is Italian.
Which is where Joseph Heller was eventually based.
Right.
And where actually Catch-22 is about.
Right.
One way or another.
Okay.
Right? And what we have is it's Lindemann, isn't it?
Yeah.
Lindemann turns up. And
it's Solly Zuckerman.
Solly Zuckerman, of course. There you go. I've got the island wrong and the scientist wrong. But the point...
But the principle is right.
The principle's the same. So what you've got is basically Zuckerman, who famously does the bombing, the bombing survey where he goes, bombing doesn't work. This isn't how you have to change bombing. You've got bombing wrong. He doesn't say that bombing's wrong. He says you're doing it wrong.
Yeah.
You've got the right idea, but you're applying it wrong. And he does a number crunching plan for Pantelleria.
It's like off-quad, but with air power.
Exactly.
It's an algorithm.
Exactly. He comes up with an algorithm, which is essentially an extension of or a precursor to what then happens in northern France, where in the run-up to D-Day, where they bomb everything and absolutely everywhere in order to create an impression of something else, and also to knock the enemy out so you don't have to fight him. And when they get to Pantelleria, basically the people on Pantelleria go, you know what?
I'm out.
We've had all this. We've had days of this.
Yeah.
We are sick of this, and we're done.
And the kind of sort of the nail in the coffin is when the Navy turn up and start shelling them from the sea as well.
Exactly.
So hang on a minute. I've got B-17s kind of hammering me. I've got offshore naval guns.
Yeah.
Forget it.
Yeah.
So so the British do land, but they just walk through a kind of sort of I mean, Pantelleria town itself is.
And the thing is,
smashed,
if you compare this to the effort, and I like one of my favourite tangents of old is if you compare this to the action in Madagascar a year before, where they scrape together what they can. It's South African biplanes. It's little Tetrarch tanks and all this sort of stuff, and they simply aren't able I mean, they win.
Yeah.
But it takes them ages, and the Vichy French fight this extraordinary delaying action and all that sort of stuff. But if you compare what the Allies are capable of,
yes,
at such an important strategic point as it was at the time, Madagascar in 42, to what they're able to apply in late spring, early summer 1943.
It's literally a year later.
Yeah, full leaps and full bounds. It's the 11-month cycle.
It's
the
amazing,
shipping's kicked in, the factories have kicked in, and if it is your factories versus their factories, the factories are winning at this point massively. Right,
absolutely.
So right, we'll ask a question because
well, hold on. Just let me say one thing very quickly before we do that. So the interesting, I think one of the biggest lessons from Husky, the invasion of Sicily, is that your commanders and your planning team need to be focused entirely on that one campaign.
Yeah.
So what everyone has to understand is that all the senior commanders are already involved in the Tunisian campaign when this is going on.
Yeah.
So Montgomery, who was earmarked for 8th Army Command in Sicily, is still commanding 8th Army in Tunisia at the time of planning. Yeah. Alexander is not only going to be commander for overall ground commander for Sicily, he is also overall ground commander for Tunisia. And at the time that is planning is all kicking off, he's absolutely got his hands full. Yeah. You know, Eisenhower is exactly the same. He's Supreme Allied Commander after the Casablanca conference in January 1943. And, you know, he's thinking about Tunisia, and they've, you know, you have the Kasserine Pass in the middle of February, just as planning for Sicily is starting.
Yeah.
And it's like flipping heck, you know, you're spinning plates and juggling all this.
Yeah.
And what is, you know, the Allies come under huge criticism by historians for the kind of haphazard way in which they plan. And I think that's just nonsense. And you made a very good point to me that no one criticised the multiple plans that the Germans went through in 1940.
No.
Before they invaded in the West.
No,
that's fine.
They scrolled through everything to find the right one.
And what is so incredible about Operation Husky is you've got what becomes 7th Army and isn't even an army at this point of the planning. They're in one headquarters in Algeria planning. You've got the overall headquarters, you know, Allied Forces headquarters planning. Then you've got 8th Army's planning, doing in Cairo. You've got the Navy, the Royal Navy in combination of different places. Yeah. You've got the RAF as well, and the USAAF.
Yep.
And then you've got the overall umbrella of Allied Air Forces. All of this has got to be brought together when planning teams are thousands of miles apart.
Yeah.
And fighting another battle.
Yeah.
And it is amazing that they managed to pull it off. I mean, it is the logistics of it, the complication, the detail is so mind-bogglingly complex when you're trying to take a force. I mean, you know, Normandy is a cakewalk in terms of mileage. You know, it's like 70 to 90 miles across the channel. This you're talking about hundreds of miles, you know, to get to Sicily, from, you know, particularly from when part of the invasion forces come from basically from Alexandria. I mean, that's like 900 miles away.
Yeah.
900 miles. Yeah. I mean, that sort of Land's End to John O'Groats kind of
distance.
It's just absolutely mind-boggling. And it's incredible what they do. And one of the big things, one of the criticisms of it is that Monty insists on having too many men on D-Day landing.
Yeah.
And because of that, it's very heavy on boots on the ground. And that comes at a cost to motorised transport, which then comes back to bite them as the campaign unfolds. But what you have to remember, at the time that decision is made, 8th Army has hit a brick wall of Italians, predominantly Italians, at Enfidaville in April 1943.
Who are entirely prepared to fight.
Who were entirely prepared to fight. And he thinks, hang on a minute, by this judgment, we could be in for a bit of a sticky time in Sicily. What's the most important thing? That it doesn't fail. Therefore, we need to make sure that whatever happens, we're covered, that it doesn't fail. So let's be overcautious on the number of men.
Overcautious, Montgomery, overcautious. James, you said it.
but overcautious with hindsight.
Yeah.
At the time, I would argue that that's just very sensible.
Yeah, no, he's basically
he's right.
He's literally picking his battles.
Why would you go into a battle unless you're absolutely certain you're going to win?
Yeah,
or you can make it as certain as you possibly can. Anyway, now questions.
Right, so we'll do some questions.
Yeah.
Where should we start? Merrin Walters asks, Merin is a friend we know from Patreon, from the podcast. And by the way, the live cast will be happening at 8:30 tonight. Don't panic, regular viewers. She asks, says Italy's southern regions were behind the curve for a long time on many things, and that's certainly the case. So, how much did the Sicilians know about the invasion to come? What was going on in reality, and what was their general knee-jerk response to meeting the invading Allied troops?
Yeah, well, I mean, your average Sicilian didn't know one thing or the other, but certainly the Italian command was utterly convinced it was going to be Sicily.
Yeah,
I mean, because it was just so blindingly obvious. Where else? And so they were absolutely convinced about it, and they took a very, very dim view of this.
Yeah.
So General Ruata was the guy who was first of all in charge of Sicily.
Yeah.
And he had it. He was tough as old boot. I mean, he was absolutely brutal and ruled with an iron fist in the Balkans when the Italians had been kind of running the show in Yugoslavia.
Although he's the guy the Germans are saying his staff are all English.
But it's just absolutely nonsense. And he gets bumped upstairs, and then Guzzoni takes over.
Yeah,
Guzzoni's never visited Sicily before he takes command, and he only takes command in June 1940.
He's literally never been there.
Never been there, and he gets off it, and and the trouble is most of the coast. So the best troops the Italians have been in North Africa.
Yep.
And they're now in the bag.
Yeah.
So what you've got left is all these coastal divisions in Sicily.
Yeah.
And they're all absolutely shockingly bad.
Well, essentially, lots of militia, essentially.
Effectively, yeah. They don't want to be there. They're not interested. They're not interested in the war. They're not interested in fighting. They've never seen any action. They're badly trained. More importantly, they're badly equipped as well.
Yeah.
And you've got these sort of huge depots in kind of Western Sicily, which have large numbers of boots, but they're all size 12 or something, And so vast majority of the Sicilian troops don't have boots, so they're wearing sort of slippers and kind of clogs and all this kind of stuff. I mean, it's just absolutely nonsense. And I think what you see in Tunisia, that is the last gasp of the Italians in the Second World War. At that point, with the end of Tunisia, morale has completely collapsed. And it doesn't matter, even in a sort of semi-totalitarian state. And I say that word advisedly. It's not a totalitarian state in the same way that Nazi Germany is or the Soviet Union is.
No.
Because there are checks on Mussolini's power.
Well, it's a sort of collaborative totalitarian state.
And Sicily has always been slightly apart from the rest of the mainland anyway.
Sicily is a part of Italy, but yet apart from Italy.
Right. So there is this sort of feeling that they might come, they might not come, who knows?
Yeah.
But they're absolutely done with the war. They're completely done. But of course, the Allied planners don't know that, and so there is this concern that when they get there, then suddenly the Italians, because they're now fighting, if they were tough in Tunisia, now they're fighting on their own patria. They might be even worse.
Yes, well, yeah, because after all that happens, doesn't it?
Basically, what happens for the most
reasonable expectation, isn't it?
Yeah, and for the most part, particularly in the southeast of Sicily, where the Eighth Army lands, the Italians just melt away. I mean, they're just fire a few shots, fire a few bursts of machine gun, and then just bugger off. Yeah.
Well, and then later on, of course, when Patton turns west,
they all kind of
they evaporate. Yeah.
But there is a bit of resistance at Gela, where lesser Scaliti and lesser Licata, which is the 3 American invasion points. But at Gela, there is some quite heavy resistance.
Yeah.
There's quite a lot of Italians get killed. The fight for Gela town itself is quite a tough one.
Yeah.
But for the most part.
Okay, well, now, so that was a question that came to us live, and then we have some questions that have come in anticipation of this evening's publication day event. And I've had a few books out, not as many as you, James. I mean, that's the other thing, is look at the inner sleeve, you think, bloody hell, he's been busy.
Yeah, and a lot of those are Ladybird experts, and
don't knock it. Don't knock it. It's a published book. When in a billion years' time, when they're sifting through the landfill, they'll find one of your Ladybird books. He must have been important.
I think this is book 32.
Wow, amazing. Right, so Daryl Griffin says, loving the podcast, of course, evening chaps. Sicily 1943, Patton and the 7th Army surges to take Palermo and Messina Then comes the notorious slapping incident.
Yes.
Yeah, and Patton gets sidelined. My question is, how much does this incident affect the dynamic of the invading US forces in D-Day in the immediate period after, until he assumes command of Third Army, which becomes operational late in July?
Yes, so you mean D-Day as in 6th of June 1944,
Yeah,
rather
yeah.
than D-Day as in
Yeah,
10th of July
yeah,
1943. Yeah, so the slapping incidents, the first one is on the 3rd of August, and the second one is on the 10th of August. And he goes a bit mad.
Nuts.
He goes a bit mad. Particularly the second one, he starts sort of pulling out his pistol, and there's a doctor that has to kind of restrain him and hold him back. And
which begs the question: after the first one, did someone say, "By the way, sir, I really think what you did is probably not worth repeating"?
Yeah, well, there was a little bit of that. But Patton just went, "No, he's a goddamn coward," and that he had a very high voice. It's an ongoing gag for Alan and I. But the second one is where he really goes ballistic.
Yeah,
and he's literally about to kill this guy, and he has to be pulled off and restrained. And it's like, all this kind of stuff.
But it's odd though, because he's having a good war at this point, isn't he?
Yeah, he is just a very, very odd guy, and it turns out this guy's suffering from malaria.
Yeah.
Anyway,
everyone.
But what happens inevitably, word of this leaks out, and it gets to the press corps.
Yeah.
And the press corps start writing about it, and then it gets to Eisenhower, and Eisenhower is literally that close to sacking him there and then.
Yeah.
The other thing about Patton is that what's quite interesting about him is he knows the kind of patter. You're not allowed to slag off the Brits.
Yeah.
But in his diary, boy, does he go on about it. Now, what is not clear is what difference there is between what he's writing in his diary, which is just for him, and is basically his kind of psychiatrist couch. That's his letting off his steam, and kind of the end of the day, it's email you don't send. And and how much he's saying to his inner circle. But what I think is clear is that John Lucas, who later infamously commands the Allies at Anzio, but has been sent there to be his kind of sort of right-hand man, his sort of buddy, absolutely buys into what he's saying.
Yeah.
And there's a couple of other senior American commanders who were also kind of around and sort of going, those limeys, all this kind of stuff. And it's incredibly unhelpful.
Well, because you do, even in the book, you do call his feelings nationalist. They go beyond.
Yeah, I think they are. I think the most important thing is Patton is number one. He's one of his people. He's got to be the victor. He's got to be the top. He's got to be top of the form. He's got to be the best. He's got to win. He's got to do this. I mean, I know it's all sounding incredibly familiar. And it is, there are massive comparisons, I think, between Patton and Trump. Yeah. But there's this kind of sort of need to always be on top. And I think that comes first, followed by the United States second. Yeah. And it's just, there are lots of good things about his generalship. There are. Yeah, and the other thing that's really interesting about him is he does always obey orders. So he grumbles and gripes.
Yes,
but when you say do it, he does it.
Yeah, that is really fascinating, because there is all the sort of wrangle about sharing roads and all that sort of stuff, isn't there? And who's going to go?
Well, I quite enjoyed unpacking that because again, there's a lot of myths about this. So for those who don't know, there is this sort of ongoing kind of saga about the fact that 8th Army there was some agreed boundaries about who was going to get what road and which was going to be 7th Army and which was. Yeah. And there was this, 8th Army was in the driving seat. That was because it was in the southeast of Sicily. And the objective is Messina. Yeah. And the reason the objective is Messina is because when you get to Messina, you then cut off the rest of the island. Yeah. And it's gone. Yeah. Because that is the artery to mainland Italy and the rest of the Mediterranean, effectively. And so that's why once you've got to Messina, you've won. So the landing in the southeast of Sicily makes sense, because that means that you are within air cover of Malta, which is 60 miles to the south. Yeah, which is good news, and also from northeast Tunisia. So you can have that aerial support, which is so important. But it's also the quickest way to get to Messina. Yeah. The reason 8th Army are in the driving seat is because they are coming from Egypt, which is to the east. And the Americans are coming from North Africa, Northwest Africa, which is in the west. Yeah. And so geographically, you don't want to start to cross. The second thing is because 7th Army is an untried army. It's never.
It's brand new. The paint is drying on the thing.
Yeah. I mean, it only becomes an army at midnight on D-Day of Operation Husky. Whereas 8th Army has won at Alamein and been across it, and they know what they're about. So they're more experienced, and that is casting no aspersions on the Americans, who performed brilliantly in Sicily. It is just the reality of the situation at the beginning of July 1943. And so it makes perfect sense. So they're in the driver's seat, and they have a much easier time of it than the Americans in the initial first few days of the invasion. So again, it makes sense to give them the priority. And from the American point of view, what's not to like? Because what that means is, I mean, what you want to do is be part of the victory, be absolutely involved in the war for the least amount of deaths as you possibly can.
Blood your guys, but not have to.
But in a gentle way,
not have to meat grind.
From the American point of view, if the British want to take all the kind of take all the heavy fighting and get all the casualties, that's great. And actually, what subsequently happens is that Patton then kind of veers west and clears off the west of the island. Has a very, very easy victory militarily, but really tests the logistics, the operational level of the 7th Army. But it is
no, it's true.
And they've never tested this, and this is literally the most important thing of all. It doesn't matter about your tactical nous. If you can't get all your kit to the battlefront, your tactics are never going to happen in the first place. So they're able to test this, and because of Palermo, because most of the Sicilians that have left Sicily for America in the first 2 decades of the 20th century have come from the western half of Sicily rather than the eastern half. There's obviously a huge Western Sicilian population in the United States. So when they go into Palermo on the sort of 22nd, 23rd of July 1943, they're cheered. They all come out and Patton is hailed and all the rest of it. And that is fantastically good publicity back home. And that is what makes Patton the superstar he becomes. That is the start of this, putting him on a massive pedestal of enormous fame. It's not Normandy. This is where it all begins. And again, from Patton's point of view, that is just a total tick, tick, tick every which way you look at it.
So it's peculiar then that he would blow his top.
Well, the other thing is that the road in question, they converge like this. So the Americans, the 2 divisions, the 45th and the 1st, which are side by side, would have had to have given ground with themselves in any case
at some point,
because they're going in. They're not going straight up. They're going they're converging towards one another. So the whole thing is a complete non-starter, and it is the whole idea of the sort of the race to Messina and all the rest of it is entirely a figment of Patton's imagination and his own competitiveness, and it is absolutely something that the British simply don't consider at all. And Monty, who is not known for his lack of competitiveness or for his own ego, it's just, when you look at his papers and you look at all the documentation, you look at Patton's papers, you look at all the kind of senior commanders' papers, the only person who's worrying about this is Patton. It's just not an issue to anybody else. But that's a very long way of answering your question, which I haven't even answered, Daryl. Yes, it does affect the dynamic of the invading forces on D-Day because Patton isn't there in the front line. But actually, I think that is an incredibly good decision because Patton is a very, very, very hard driver, and actually, because of the huge material advantage that the Allies have in the Second World War, there's no need for that. And if you look at Third Army in Northwest Europe, they are the army that have, by a country mile, the largest casualties. And for what? They're going to win. So the balance that the senior commanders have in Northwest Europe is to push forward so you get the war over and done with as quickly as possible, but not pushing forward so hard that you have this slaughter and this bloodbath. And I would say that Patton veers on the wrong side of that.
Right now, we've 2 questions that came to us earlier that I think we can kind of answer together. One from Dr. Alan Ambler, and it's fantastic to have actually someone with a doctorate that wasn't honorary like mine on the paying attention, and Rob Lavin, and they're related, these questions. Can the following question be put to James now? How much was moved from Sicily to Greece to the Balkans as a result of mincemeat? And how long did it stay there before OKW realised there wouldn't be an imminent invasion in the Eastern Mediterranean? And then this kind of ties up with Rob's question. My question is, how big of an impact do you think that Operation Barclay had on the success of the invasion? Is it conceivable the campaign would have turned out differently if the Germans had not fallen for the deception? So mincemeat is famously the dead body.
Yeah, dropped in the sea off Spain.
The homeless guy.
Ben McIntyre's book.
Ben McIntyre's book, and the man
with no name,
and Ian Fleming, and
yep.
It's so
double crossed.
It's so sexy. That goes into Pujol on double cross and all that.
Yep.
And then what's Barclay though?
Well, Barclay is the overall deception plan for Husky.
Right.
So mincemeat is a sort of a subsection of Barclay.
Yeah.
So there's a number of deception measures. So what the Allies are desperately trying to do is trying to kind of persuade the Axis, the Italians and the Germans, that Sicily is not where they're going to invade, and actually they might be invading Sardinia, and Sardinia is a stepping stone for invading Greece, which, you know, if you look at the geography, makes no sense whatsoever. And mincemeat, you know, the plans on mincemeat are that it's going to be Sardinia and Greece, basically. There are also, though, there's a load of something like 43 different sabotage events, actions in Greece,
right?
Which is Operation Animals, which is another subsection of Operation Barclay, which is run by a guy called Eddie Myers, who is an engineer. And these are completely forgotten because Ben McIntyre hasn't written a book about them, but are absolutely fantastic. And involve blowing up bridges, and you know, it's all guns of Navarone stuff. I mean, it really is sort of people with Sten guns, sort of creeping through the kind of Greek countryside and going
brilliant.
Stabbing Germans with their commando knives and then blowing up a bridge. I mean, it is an Italian, of course. It's absolutely amazing. And so when you're looking at mincemeat, you need to look at the just Operation Barclay as a whole,
which is the sort of bodyguard.
And you know, mincemeat is it's such a good story. It's so brilliant. And what I love about it is the fact that, you know, sort of Montague and everyone, you know, they get so carried away with it. I mean, it's almost too good. But the truth of the matter is that while it is absolutely the case that what is found on the dead body that washes up on the coast of washes up near the coast of southern Spain does make its way to the Wolf Slayer and to Hitler, all it does is confirm what Hitler already thinks, whereas it doesn't dissuade anyone who thinks that Sicily is going to be the main attack. So it reinforces Hitler and does nothing to persuade Mussolini or Kesselring or Guzzoni that it's going to be anything other than Sicily. And the truth of the matter is, when you look at it, it can be nothing other than Sicily. Which suggests that the whole
but in the same way, it couldn't be anywhere else, anywhere other than Normandy. There's just no way you would land in the Pas-de-Calais.
But that is also a kind of indictment of the kind of, you know, how bad
rotten thinking in
Italian high command and their own intelligence system.
Right. Okay. Another question. David Patterson says, do you think the removal of command from 1st US Division of Terry Allen and Teddy Roosevelt was justified? Was it solely based on the trainer's slog, or were the personal characteristics of the general more important?
Yeah, this is really interesting because Terry Allen was and Teddy Roosevelt Jr., who later is executive officer, i.e. second in command of 4th Division landing on Utah Beach. Terry Allen is much loved by the men of the Big Red One, and he's a kind of hard drinking, no nonsense, doesn't stand on ceremony, doesn't expect people to wear ties, all this kind of stuff. And famously or infamously, what happens is after the fall of, after the surrender on the 13th of May 1943 of Axis forces in Tunisia, he says, "Okay, fellas, let's go and have a hooligan in Iran. We're going back to Iran. Go and have a kind of, you know, a massive bender." And they all do, and half of them end up in prison. And he just goes around the next day and kind of bells them all out. And everyone goes, "Oh, what a boy!" And this is not the Patton way at all. It is just totally the opposite way. And it's traditionally been blamed on Patton for sacking Terry Allen. So what basically happens is Trowina. So they head off. There's a whole load of them. Half of there's a provisional corps is created, which includes the Rangers and the 3rd Division and various others. And they head off.
82nd Airborne are bunged into that, aren't they?
Yes, they are. Yeah, the 82nd Airborne. That's Gavin and so on. And they head off west and clear the western part of. Meanwhile, the Big Red One, the 1st Division and the 45th, are still heading northwards to try and cut this coastal road, to cut off
Yeah.
any remaining Italians which want to kind of head into the northeast. And then Montgomery goes and Alexander say, well, it'd be great to have them involved. Thank you very much. And so they're given the northern half. So as you're going into kind of sort of, I should say it that way, as you're going into sort of northeast Sicily, the Americans get that northern bit, that kind of sort of heading eastwards towards Messina. And the 1st Infantry Division, the big red one, as it's known, because it's got a single badge of a single red coloured one in it, so it's always known as a big red one. They are given this key mountain town of Troina, and it becomes this absolutely brutal sort of 6-day battle. And it is really, really tough. And one of the problems up there is that it's so high. It's the highest town in Sicily. And it's this sort of weird, undulating sort of mountain plain. It's a very odd place. And it's very kind of, you just, when you're standing up there and you go and see Troina and you look over Troina for the first time, you're looking at it from the American perspective, you just immediately go, wow, I totally get why that's a tough.
Well, I remember,
and you've got all this kind of incredibly thin soils and lots of shards of rock.
But I remember, I mean, you know, and we are beginning to start to run out of time, but I remember, it was probably a year and a half ago when we were first doing the podcast, and you went to Sicily, and you'd been, and I think you'd done a tour, and, you were getting ready to write the book. And I remember you saying, "Well, crikey, you go there and you think, how the bloody hell did they do this at all?" Because
it's only 38 days.
Well, and that was then your next point is it's so defendable, so defensible.
It really is.
So all the assaults are uphill, everything's hardtack, everything's in view of an OP. Absolutely every aspect of it is bad news. Because if you're on a plain, there are mountains and there are plains. And if you're on a plain, they can see you from the mountains. And it's kind of as simple as that. So it's not like Normandy where there's the the defensibility of the countryside in itself. It's the fact that the entire landscape is mitigating against an invading dot, which is why the Sicilian villages are all away from the seashore.
So they can't be easily snatched from corsairs.
Exactly, they can't be. Literally, pirates can't come and steal their women, and then the Norman castle keeps on tops of mountains from the bad old days of the 11th and 12th century, with crusades going backwards and forwards, and Moorish raiders and so on, and the history of Sicily is defended hard as nails, difficult places. So, and I was really struck by this in reading the book, and it really stuck with me, the thing you'd said when you'd gone to Sicily, which is like, how the hell did they do this?
It is absolutely amazing.
It is in 38 days. It's incredibly impressive.
Just to very quickly finish on Terry Allen and Teddy Roosevelt. I don't know. I think that was quite a hard sacking. It was a sacking, actually was led by Bradley, who was the two-corps commander. Omar Bradley, who then leapfrogs over Patton and becomes First Army commander, and then becomes 12th Army Group commander in Northwest Europe, in Normandy, on the 1st of August 1944. He's the one who gets rid of Allen. I think there is just a sense that Allen is much though he's loved by his men, and tough though he is, and good though he is, he's slightly singing to a different tune. He's not quite on the same peg. And you just need to all be on the same peg. And it's one of those harsh dismissals, but probably was the right one. It's the truth of the matter. But to go back to your original point, I mean, one day we will be standing on the top of Azzurro, I promise you.
Oh, God.
And one of the most amazing things about Azzurro, which certainly is one of these incredible actions, where the Canadians, just a single battalion of Canadians, go up this literally sheer face.
It's an insane
It's the Hasty
story.
Peas. Hastings and Prince Edward's Regiment, always known as the Hasty Peas. They go up this kind of, this almost perpendicular slope at night, take the top, and the Germans are kind of in the town below the summit. And what they've captured is the optics. And the OP, which is what you need. So then they can instead of the Germans using that to direct their own artillery onto the Canadians, they can then direct their own artillery onto the Germans. But it's amazing. But when you stand there, you go, oh yeah, and kind of 8 miles away, there's Azzurro. And beyond that is Ragobito. And beyond that is Centauripe.
What's also,
beyond that is Etna.
What's
and it just
also
goes on and on.
striking about that story, though, is you open the book with Paddy Mayne and the boys, and they come in and they take these gun batteries and they do their special forces thing. Hasty Peas, they're just infantry. They're line infantry.
Yeah.
And
they've never been in battle.
They've never been in battle before. And something is asked of them that is absolutely 100% a thing as you'd expect some special forces guys to do. Go tab up to a mountainside at night, find the way up the mountain, get on top of the castle, and then hold it until relieved. And they're just line infantry, and what happens? They finish that action, they dust themselves down, and they do the next one.
Then they do the next one. Then they do they do Ajira.
Anyway,
Just very quickly, but what is amazing about it is you've got all the way in that northeast corner. No, and it's like Sauron's eye.
Yeah.
It's just like everywhere you look, there.
Yeah. You see, we're out of time.
Oh my God, already.
I heartily recommend it. I can tell you this. I've read the book. I've read the bloody book. So
you bloody well have.
James Holland, Sicily 43. The audiobook is also excellently done. Thank you all for joining us. Those of us on the Patreon, we'll see you in a minute once we've ordered some pizza. We'll see you in a tick. Thank you so much for joining us. We hope you've enjoyed this publication day.
Thank you. Thank you very much to Waterstones. Thank you for having us on. Thank you for keeping going.
Go in a bookshop, buy your copy in a bookshop. Even if you've already gone to some filthy internet provider, go and buy the bloody thing from a bloody bookshop, because
well, I can't guarantee that it's a great book, but what I can guarantee is a great story. It absolutely is. The story of the Sicilian campaign is amazing. We haven't even touched on the mafia.
Well, you're going to have to buy the book. If you want to know about the mafia, you got to buy the book.
You got to know it.
You got to buy the book.
Don't disrespect me.
It's a nice book you got here, James Holland. It'd be a shame if something happened to it.
I'll never take sides against the family.
Goodbye, everyone. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.